Kyrie Irving returned in that game after what I believe amounted to an 8-game suspension after reposting a video containing anti-Semitic propaganda. He obviously had the list of demands from the Brooklyn Nets and their owner Joe Tsai that needed to be met in order for him to return to play after his initial attempt at an apology obviously ended up being anything but. And so Kyrie came back. He scored 14 points and had 5 boards in 26 minutes in that game, but it still ended up being about what Kyrie Irving was saying and what was going on around him, because at the Barclays Center, you had a protest going on outside of the arena itself during the course of that game. It was the members of the Israel United in Christ group that, based on the ruling by the Southern Poverty Law Center, they have been designated a hate group. They were handing out flyers and chanting in support of Kyrie Irving. You had a whole situation where Jaylen Brown from the Celtics, who is a member of the NBA Players Association, one of its brass there, reposting that, saying energy, because he claims he mistook them for an all-black fraternity, very popular fraternity, Omega Psi Phi. So all of this happening on Sunday in the middle of what is also a basketball game. So to Charlotte's point, it was really hard to remember what happened in the basketball game portion of this. But where did this all land with you, Charlotte? Obviously, there's a lot of layers of it that touch you with the names that I just mentioned. But where did this land with you when you saw this unfold?
Yeah, well, thanks for giving me a place to sort of talk this out, Mike, because, you know, I'm Jewish. And my grandfather came over from what was Moravia, basically, which was like is the Czech Republic now, but has been like a bajillion things since then. And, you know, his family came escaping the rise in violence against Jews. And then half of his family was killed in concentration camps. So to me, this is a level of personal and serious. And I think what has upset me the most is the way it's been covered and the lack of coverage. I think giving Kyrie Irving a platform to sit there and say that he's upset that he's being labeled an anti-Semite because we can't know what's in his heart, when he has posted the link to a video of a group, as you said, labeled a hate group, that has also claimed Jews fabricated the Holocaust and that Jews are trying to just keep Black people down. And I think, to me, the most heartbreaking part of this whole saga is that it has become that. It has become this narrative of Black people and Jews, that there's this myth that Jews are trying to keep Black people down and that Black people need to unite against them. But all of this is like a white supremacist dream. This is what people want. This is what people who want to stoke division, who want to keep that going. And I think it's really uncomfortable for a lot of people, especially white people, to talk about, because you run the risk of being seen as racist if you defend, you know, Jewish people in this situation, because it gets so warped. But that's not what it is. It's not about being racist or saying, it's about saying, no matter who is saying it, saying that the Holocaust didn't happen is unconscionable. Like, there is a special place in whatever afterlife you believe in for people who deny that humanity of such a tragedy. And to me, it's just appalling. It's scary. You see Kanye doing this, and then someone goes out and vandalizes a Jewish cemetery that says Kanye was right. By giving Kyrie Irving a platform to answer questions in a bullshit way about his anti-Semitism, the fact that he can't own up to it, the fact that he can't say to everybody else defending him. People are arguing with me on Twitter saying I'm the problem because I'm calling out Kyrie for stoking lies and dangerous rhetoric against my people, who I have a direct relation to that violence. And so it's just really gross to me that he keeps doing this, that he's not being held accountable. I think Judaism and the Jewish people in general have been that scapegoat for thousands of years, because it is a smaller group. It's something that not everybody feels connected to, or the uproar just isn't quite there. And I think that this feels very long-winded and rambling. But what what I really want to end on in this what I'm trying to say is that my colleague Yaron Weitzman, who's an incredible basketball writer who writes for Fox Sports, his wife's grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. She was 12 years old. Her family was murdered. She made it out, raised a family in New Jersey, went around the country talking about, anti-Semitism and how important it is to never forget and all of that. He went to her funeral and her burial on Sunday. And then he went to the Nets game, and he heard Kyrie say all of this, and he watched, this hate group hand out flyers that say the truth about anti-Semitism. And that to me is the whole thing. There are two parts of this. There's the people who are saying horrible, dangerous things, and then there are the people who have lived the truth of it. And it's really appalling to me.
Yeah, I think that's what we've always tried to preach at the center of all this. There are very real consequences for the words that get said. And I think part of what's really popped up in a lot of watching all this unfold to me is because I heard Jon Stewart talking about this, about how we need to make room for conversation amongst groups because that's where learning ends up happening. And that's how you get people that are part of marginalized groups that are being pitted against each other to kind of see more of the commonalities in there. And that, is punishing Kyrie the right way to go about all this. The problem with this is none of this has been a conversation. It's been a bunch of snippets, right? Like, we got in trouble originally because Kyrie posted something without any explanation for it. He didn't post what he thought. He didn't post any specifics about it. He just posted, this is the product, and then let everyone make their judgments from that, and then acted surprised when we all pointed out the things that we saw that were problematic in that. You take Jaylen Brown's role in all of this. Said he just saw people, and he said, I saw people in my community supporting Kyrie Irving, and he said, I saw that, and I wanted to make sure I push that out there. Wasn't a lot of thought to it. It was see ball, hit ball in that instance. And I think because everyone seems to be operating off such a pinched nerve in this, off such a raw place from this, that it's a lot more reaction than it is taking the time to do the work. And that's the part that I guess when you look at the core of what happened with the Nets is even more disappointing, because it was clear hearing him talk. Kyrie Irving is not different. He's not changed on the other side of this. We're seeing Kyrie's comments, and part of me wonders if sports policies in general around punishment for these things are really in a place that's going to get someone better in a hurry, right? This is all predicated around the Nets wanting the guy to play basketball again. They were trying to put out whatever they could. If Kyrie Irving was half the player that he is now, they would have just released him, and this would not have been nearly the story he is. But he's great at basketball, and so they want to go out there and recoup a return on investment from the millions of dollars they're paying him to play really great basketball. And nowhere in that process, it seemed like, all right, we're going to check a box so that the Nets and Joe Tsai and everyone can look at this and say, hey, look, we did our thing. We're showing our work, which we ask our sports teams to do. And I understand, but we see on the other side, there wasn't a lot of change in the one area where it looked like people were actually going to engage. Like, you were going to have him sit down and talk to people. You were going to, in theory, have a dialogue. And for nothing good to come out of the other side of that, I can't be surprised when tweets and things and snippets that aren't whole conversations but are more reactionary in this end up getting replaced, by what was supposed to be the area where actual community was supposed to happen and actual crossover was supposed to happen, and didn't. Because like you said, Charlotte, I think in general, and I can't really empathize with this position. I'm a cis white male, so it's not like I have a marginalized group that I can really see through the eyes of on this. But like you said, this seems like something that anyone who is looking to sow the seeds of division would greatly enjoy amongst groups of people that probably have a lot more in common than either side realizes.
Totally. I completely agree. I think, I feel like I tweet this all the time because it's sort of the only way that I can think to encapsulate the whole thing. But you can't say that you are fighting for social justice or that you are against racism and then propagate anti-Semitic tropes, just as you cannot say you are fighting anti-Semitism and you are for social justice and not condemn all forms of racism. Those two things go hand in hand, and it has to be a concerted effort, because that's the only way you're going to get somewhere. And it really is the perfect way to divide people by pitting people who have very real past and current traumas um, against each other and feel the need to protect each other. You know, I think that there's a desire to be with your tribe or be with your people and be like, I've got your back. So in that sense, I understand what Jaylen Brown is saying. I understand, you know, but you can't be Jaylen Brown and drive 13 hours to Atlanta to march for social justice in 2020 and then come out and retweet a hate group with energy. You can't do that and have any credibility. You're a hypocrite in that case. And you know, it really makes me so sad that that is what this feels like it's being boiled down to, because it's not about a choice. It's not about who you support. It's about calling everybody out for their bias and their bigotry, and understanding how real the consequences of those words, a simple action, even an answer at a press conference, is so much bigger and carries so much weight because of the amount of people these guys reach. And I haven't been very impressed with how other people in the NBA have. I haven't seen much of a reaction in terms of like, Kyrie, cut it out, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like there's the reason behind that, and I'm only going to speak to this in this way because I am a black man that the majority of the NBA is, right? And I think there's a reality to a lack of information and the power of misinformation and how fast someone can be misled, right? There's now on Twitter, I don't know if Elon Musk kept this going, but after reading a headline, you could retweet. People were so quick to retweet. It's like, oh, you sure you want to read the article first before you spread this to your X amount of followers, right? Like, I think we're so easily manipulated. And this started a long time ago with the former president, and honestly, the power of the hate speech that he was able to push. And we have been dealing with the other side of that for we still are to this day. So I say that to say a lot of people who looked up to Kyrie and saw him as a czar of humanity and public rights and race and religion, maybe in a way that most African Americans aren't as haven't spent as much time vested in as Kyrie. So you looked at him as a beacon of light of information. He was misled and acted upon it, and it seems that his ego or his new education and understanding from these teachings has led him so he's not able to apologize, and he isn't. And when we talked about this before, Mike, I said I was happy that he didn't at the time because he hadn't learned anything, and I didn't want to hear him lie to the media to play basketball because he hadn't learned anything. Now we are dealing with, like you said, this is a white supremacist dream, right? The division is here. The flames have been stoked. People have been mobilized off of 140 characters, which is the sad part about all of this, right? To the point where I'm not sure everyone's credibility should have already been in question. But I think in the time of George Floyd, a lot of people were able to put their backs against social justice and change and Black Lives Mattering and things of that sorts. But in reality, there's a lot more that goes into being an advocate of that I'm not sure a professional athlete has the time to do in a just or reasonable or respectful or right manner.
Well, I think it is. It's having to kind of see from a perspective that's not your own. And when we went through everything that you talked about, you're right. We leaned on the women in the W, the men in the NBA, because these are people who are giving us their experience. Like, this is what I have dealt with when it comes to racism and police brutality. This is not me supposing. This is real life experience that I've dealt with, that even being a millionaire and a professional athlete hasn't shielded me from, because my skin is still this color and people still see me a certain way. And it seems like that's been what's being asked here. It's, hey, like, I understand you might not have this perspective as someone who is Jewish and has heard their things their whole lives. All they're asking is to be heard. And right now, everyone's operating from a defensive posture. I likened this to when, you've heard people and, white people said, hey, what you're saying or what you're doing is racist, people tend to hear you are racist, and it becomes personal and it hits a nerve. And then you stand back and you get defensive and you say, well, I'm not racist for X, Y, and Z reasons. And then people end up saying dumb things like, oh, look, I have a black friend. And all of that happens because people get in this defensive posture from certain things that to them become accusatory, when really it's just someone trying to usually tell you or ask you, like, hey, just so you know, this is how it sounds to the people who this affects directly. And that's something that I think everyone now, as we go through this and the vantage points kind of shift. And in this case, this conversation coming from a vantage point we haven't heard from, at least this directly, in quite a while, is a good learning opportunity to kind of empathize with and look through another person's eyes.
Yeah, I also think there's maybe one Jewish player in the NBA. And I think that makes a big difference, because if you are exposed to people, you are like, oh, cool, this is Charlotte. She celebrates Hanukkah and she, is a weirdo. But it's not like, oh, here's Charlotte. She's a Jew, which, like, I know people who are not Jewish who are like, can I say Jew? Like, am I allowed to call someone a Jew? And I'm like, I mean, that's what we are, but it has become so vilified and used as the other so much throughout history that it feels like this mysterious thing if you're not exposed to it, where it's really just like the Jewish faith. Of course, there are extreme levels of it that I do not agree with, and treatment of women. I feel like that's sort of across the board in religion. You can be like, okay, the weird ends, not super into. But I think that, the way I've been raised in it and have understood it, and my grandfather was a cantor. Also, my dad's not Jewish. So Charlotte Wilder, that's not a Jewish name. So I think sometimes I feel like, what right do I have if I sort of fly under the radar but also, like, I was bat mitzvahed. Like, my mom's father and grandfather were cantors in the synagogue. And one thing I do, this is such a lovely image to me, is my grandfather, they lived in Baltimore, and he lived down, my great grandfather, and he was the cantor at the synagogue. So that's where he worked, and he would walk to work every day. And in the 50s, white flight, most of their neighbors left, and my great grandfather stayed, and a bunch of black families moved in around him, and he became really close with them, and they would walk him to work every day, and they called him the Reverend. And, like, what a beautiful moment, right? And, like, my great uncle, he was a lawyer who defended, black people in Baltimore, and then he moved to Israel to defend Palestinians. So it's like, I have these models in my life of the counter example of entrenching yourself. And I'm not saying that to be like, look at these good Jews or look at these good white people. I'm just saying it to be like, that is the kind of spirit that I would so love everyone to be able to move forward with, instead of these really sad, ugly divisions.
Go.